Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in video description. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to another Archaeo-Scope. This series is kind of like an inverted Questions of Doom, where rather than you sending me a question to try and answer to the best of my ability, I put a question out there for you in the form of a video to watch, think about, mull over, discuss and debate in the comment section below, and hopefully together we come away with a greater understanding of the topic at hand, a sculpted notion that one of us on our own might not have achieved. And today I would very much appreciate your input, because today's Archaeoscope is really a result of a surprising series of interactions that I had on the Archaeosoup Facebook page a few days ago. It was November the 11th, Sunday, Armistice Day, the 100-year anniversary of the end of the Great War, the First World War. And it was everywhere. It was in the news, it was on the radio, it was on the TV, it was inescapable. And I wanted to add on the Archaeosoup Facebook page a little bit of something different, a bit of context, as opposed to just focusing on, for example, the Western Front and the trenches and this kind of thing. I wanted to add a bit some interesting elements that people could take away with them and reflect on in a slightly different way. So one of the things that I shared was a map produced by a statistical website that showed the loss that different nations during the First World War suffered as a percentage of population, not as a percentage of military. And on this map, quite rightly, the Ottoman Empire, was shown to have lost 25% of the population, including its military. And of that 25%, only 15%, I seem to recall, was in fact military losses. So a huge number of civilians died as a direct result of the First World War violence that either directly killed civilians or enabled more violence to be enacted within the Ottoman sphere. But nonetheless, it showed that across the world, in Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, in parts of Asia and Australia, this was a global war. This was a world war. And at this point, I just want to say that really this video, I suppose, is about the balance between skepticism and cynicism. In so much as we received a comment on that post where there was a sort of cynical attitude being displayed. A gentleman from Italy, seemingly, was not buying. I don't buy it, he said, and wasn't buying the notion that the Ottomans lost 25% of the population, but the Italians only lost 600,000 people. Now, initially he was arguing that that should be counted as 10%, given that the Italians fielded around 6 million soldiers during the First World War, so that would be 10% of the military, not of the population. So he was arguing about the specifics of the stats, and we sort of highlighted that actually this is a population graph, not a military numbers graph. But he didn't want to buy into it. Now I don't want to necessarily go into too much of a thought process as to why he didn't want to buy into it. Presumably he simply couldn't abide the notion that the Ottomans suffered more in terms of numbers and more in terms of a percentage than the Italians did, for some reason, for whatever reason. But he refused to accept the stats. He went so far as to say, well, in that case, we should also include those people who were killed during the Holocaust in the Second World War, or perhaps people who died of the Spanish flu. And at this point, I got as cranky as I allow myself to get on the Archaeosoup Facebook page. I said, come on now, you're being a bit cantankerous, quite bizarrely cantankerous now. You know, I don't have to explain to you, hopefully, why it is that people who died in the Holocaust in the 1930s and 40s, well, mainly the 1940s, it shouldn't be on a map about First World War casualties. At that point, he shut down the conversation. He said, "Right, thank you. I'm not going to follow your page anymore." Blah blah blah, and went away. And then later on that day, there was another sort of series of threads that were unfolding on another post about the First World War. And this was from the Metro newspaper. It's a newspaper that's handed out on trains here in the UK. But it was highlighting a recording that was made of the moment that the guns fell silent on the Western Front. And what's interesting about this recording is that there's a point when the guns are silent that you can hear birds chirping and chirping. Cheeping? I'm not going to pay that much for that. Oh, too expensive. No, they're chirping and chirping, tweeting, as it were, twittering. And this got people's attention. Excuse me. They said, well, this can't be a real recording. If there are birds there just waiting to chirp when the guns go silent, this must be manufactured. I suppose at best people were saying, "That's odd. Yeah, whatever," raising a slight eyebrow. But at worst, there was actually a gentleman from Germany who said, "Pretty sure this is complete bollocks." He went on to say that he thought he'd heard some of these recordings of explosions in computer games, and that the birds would not just be sat around waiting to chirp on cue when the guns fell silent. Now, at this point, again, in terms of this balance between cynicism and skepticism, I found myself thinking, well, it's healthy to be skeptical, but I have no agenda here. As an archaeologist, as a historian, as an honest actor in this particular arena, especially on November the 11th, 2018, I'm not going to be presenting you with fantasy. This is about sober life. And so, thankfully, actually, it turns out that some research had been done, I think from the University of Edinburgh, and put into a PDF that I was able to find and share, talking about the behaviour of birds on the Western Front over the course of the First World War. It was a front that was hundreds of miles long. The conflict lasted 4 or 5 years. Of course, the birds had to adapt their behaviour, and they did. They deliberately did not sing when the guns were firing because they could not hear each other, so they were quiet, and then they sang when the guns stopped firing. They nested in guns, in trenches, anywhere really. Once the tree cover had been blown away, especially in no man's land, they were opportunists in terms of how and where and when they were nesting and living. But the point is, life found a way, and I shared that PDF. In fact, I'll put a link to it below in the video information because it's just an interesting read. And thankfully, people did seem to respond quite well to that. They said, "Oh, thank you very much for the follow-up," this kind of thing. So that was nice. But that chap who said, "No, this is this bollocks," did not respond to being presented with further facts. Now, you may be curious just at this point, why was there a recording of the guns falling silent? Well, this wasn't for posterity. This was actually a legitimate tactic. They would use a sort of almost a stereophonic kind of locating, triangulation, I suppose, method, where that you have different microphones listening to the enemy barrage, and depending on when the different microphones picked up certain blasts, they could estimate how far away the gun was from each microphone. It was a way of trying to better target the enemy. That's why they were recording explosions during the First World War. But again, I didn't really feel that I should have to go into that much detail when presenting very openly and honestly information about the past, especially on such a poignant day. Excuse me. I have quite a sore throat. So this did take me aback, and for a couple of days I found myself just shaking my head. I was astonished that especially on Armistice you would have people being so cynical as opposed to skeptical. And it made me wonder, is there something that archaeology and history has to do about this? And that people operating in that public sphere have to behave in a certain way to try and immediately say, look, don't worry, you can trust what we're saying? Or is this actually symptomatic of a broader cultural problem, particularly on social media, where people, as a result of, I'm trying to avoid saying fake news, but as a result of it being increasingly difficult to distinguish between satire, news, and propaganda on these platforms, that's bled into other aspects. So documentation of history, even essays, where essays are stated opinions, people behave as though somehow you have to be immediately skeptical of that material. It's the only safe. Nuke them from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Be very skeptical. It's the only safe option. Is just to dismiss information, new information, out of hand. If I didn't already know it, it must be untrue. It must be potentially even fake. I'm not really sure what the answer is, because I didn't want to have to make the case. I wanted people to be reflecting, not to be fighting on that day in particular. But then, actually, in more recent days, on other posts, I've noticed there's a similar, culture in the air. There was a post from, or some news rather, coming out of Pompeii, where some yet more erotic art has been found. And admittedly, that's not necessarily news. There's quite a lot of erotic art to be found in Pompeii, but nonetheless, it was a beautiful image, and the clarity of the face that was being shown in the news report was very interesting, and it was a legitimate press release. So I shared it, and someone commented saying, "Oh, this is just marketing for Pompeii, just like with the so-called rediscovered day or date for the eruption of Vesuvius," which, on the one hand, I suppose you could say yes, I guess, maybe. Pompeii, just like, for example, Vindolanda, the Roman fort here on Hadrian's Wall, they do manage and frequently put out press releases about what they've discovered, partly to raise awareness and to keep people aware that stuff is happening on the site. But that's not the same as marketing. That's not necessarily the same as McDonald's trying to get you in the door, or not necessarily the same as a brand activity. Rather, it's in this world where we do actually measure everything monetarily, and also monetarily, lots of these sites are suffering. They have to behave in certain ways. They do have to trickle out information to keep the interest going. Is that the same as marketing? Does it warrant that same slightly cynical response, as opposed to, I suppose, a form of skepticism, or a form of acknowledgement that this is the world in which we are living, and that is how these sites have to behave? I mean, I learned that in a big way when I worked at the Jorvik Viking Centre. The York Archaeological Trust absolutely has to sing for its supper. It simply does. It is not a recipient of government money, and they do rely on people coming to the Viking Centre, buying a ticket to see the exhibition, and also other people interacting with them in other ways, whether that's hiring a yacht to do digs, or to do school workshops or other things. And they need that. And so that's just part of the model. It's not necessarily merely marketing. It's not necessarily, in that sense, coercive. And I guess that's what I'm getting at here, isn't it? It's the difference between something which is information being made available, and information that's trying to undermine your sense of self, that's trying to coerce you into another way of thinking. Come with me, this way. A diversion, as it were, from your reality. When none of this, the stats, the news about the guns on the front, or the news about the painting from Pompeii, were intended to coerce. It was information that I'm simply offering up on a platter. Here you go, quite literally for free. Take a look if you want. What should happen about this? Do people need to learn the difference between skepticism and cynicism? Do people need to be better at checking that when they when they come to these sorts of archaeological Facebook pages, or is it the job of myself, for example, and other archaeologists to get right in there and present present a full context to every story in order to demonstrate somehow that this is information, not some form of coercion, not some form of marketing? I'm not sure, and it just got me thinking, and I keep on thinking about it. I've kept on mulling this over, and so I figured I would share it with you guys to comment on below. I suppose one final thing just to mention is that it's undeniable, absolutely undeniable, that history, historically, and frankly today, arguably more than ever, is absolutely tied up with agendas. People, for various reasons, use historical narratives to further particular political agendas. Whether that's about a national identity, or whether that's about a mode of living, whether it's about a mode of exchange, such as capitalism, for example. These absolutely are things that do warrant constant skepticism and thought and questioning. And so, to a certain extent, I understand that archaeologists always need to be aware of that. What we do is inherently not only political in the sense that we're dealing with people and how artifacts and power relationships interact through societies that we're studying, but also everything we say and present is manipulable by people who are explicitly looking to get a political agenda forwarded, or increased in terms of its validity. So there is that, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. I do acknowledge that in that sense, you can hardly blame people in this particular environment for being skeptical. But it is that question of cynicism which I wanted to bring to you today, to think about, to comment below, discuss and debate, and also to be civil about. I want a civil conversation, because this has the potential to be a bit ugly if people start getting a bit too opinionated, or a bit too passionate, shall we say, charitably. Anyway, my voice is about to disappear entirely. I only have so much vitamin C drink left. I shall leave it there. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.